you left the US somewhat recently as of the recording of this. And well, let me turn it over to you first. Tell everybody, as much as you want to share, what transpired there. When did you leave, and what was the anatomy on all that happening?
Okay. Let me see. So when I originally left China in 2015, it was never intended to be a long time that I was gone. I had always wanted to return, and I had hoped that that would happen quickly. But turns out that the person who was watching my service dog while I was in China stole her. And so I
Oh,
returned to the United States and won her back in court, representing myself as my own lawyer. And that took a very long time. But I'm so glad that I did. But in that time, the US managed to debt trap me, which isn't very surprising. I had managed to save some money in China because, the cost of living versus wages is pretty good for most workers there. Most people save money every month, even if they make a quote unquote lower wage. And so I'd managed to put some money away, but not enough to shield myself from the United States and the level of debt that swarms around that society.
yeah.
So I was stuck in the United States the entire time. And by the time that I was like in a place where I could even consider thinking about returning to China, COVID happened. Um, and I took COVID very seriously, of course. I mean, I have numerous health conditions, and I just knew that if I got it, that I would be disabled by it further, and I was right. So I went into full isolation. I'm still on some level of isolation 3 years later, though now able to go out into society quite a lot more because I'm here in Mexico. But I was just stuck in Arizona trying to not get COVID and trying to survive, just the paycheck to paycheck sort of lifestyle. Um, yeah, and then I have to even think about it because it's so hard to remember. It's like, I don't know if you feel this way too. I know a lot of people that I have talked to do, but it feels like COVID was like a blur. Like, just
Hmm.
like time is messed up when I try to think back about everything that happened with COVID. But what finally culminated in me leaving was I was infected with COVID by a family member due to their carelessness. I had started to look into leaving the United States and what my options would be. At the time, China was still heavily limiting immigration by
Hmm.
Americans.
Hmm.
So I wasn't going to have access to the sort of visa I would need. So I was like, well, what's my next choice? And I had lived in Mexico for a couple of months in high school. Um, and that same friend that I lived with in high school contacted me, and they're living in the city that I live in now. And they were like, I think you'd really like it here. People mask, doctors take COVID very seriously. Everything is open to the outdoors, so you'll be safer. You should really look into coming here. And so I was considering that at the same time that I got infected with COVID by this family member. And as I knew would happen, COVID completely disabled both myself and my partner. I developed severe vertigo to a point where I could not walk. I couldn't drive. It was awful. I felt like I was going to fall just like getting up out of my chair at any time. So it was very traumatizing because every time that I would look around, I was reminded of the day that I had been infected and all the trauma surrounding that because it was ongoing, right? And it didn't stop until January of this year. So I had this vertigo for over a year. And
But you're doing better now.
yeah, I'm doing
Well,
better.
that's
Yes.
good. Yeah.
I'm,
I mean,
yeah, I'm so thankful that the world doesn't spin when I'm just looking around. I mean, it made it hard to paint. I like,
mm,
which is the thing I love the most. And then my partner developed a pulmonary embolism, and we couldn't seek medical care in the United States because
oh
we
my
couldn't afford
God.
it. So the only way that we managed to finally see a doctor is we walked across the border with Arizona and Nogales, Mexico, and we saw a doctor there who just gave us basic antivirals and antibiotics. There was like 4 different meds that we were given, and that is when we started to see an improvement, because prior to that we couldn't even get out of bed. It was hard to even cook for ourselves, like it was really bad. um, and I had known that would happen, and my entire family has denied that it was as serious as it was, and I haven't spoken to that family member since this happened. But there's been a lot of gaslighting and blaming around the disability and the fallout that resulted from this. And of course, I couldn't work. I was a trilingual interpreter at the time, translating both Mandarin Chinese and Spanish. And I lost my job because I couldn't interpret with that level of vertigo. And we had very little savings, if any. So I knew I've been homeless before, more than once, and I knew that if we didn't act quickly, we were going to end up back on the streets. And I wasn't going to be able to live with myself, because I had Bear, who was my first service dog, the one that I won back in court. And she was getting elderly, and I just knew she wouldn't be okay, like living out of a car or something. She was like 10 years old, and starting to develop issues with her paw and walking. And so I made a quick decision with my partner that we had to leave the United States. We pulled whatever small amount of money we had out of our 401ks and used that money to get out. But as we were leaving, everything went wrong, literally everything. They removed mask mandates from airlines. So obviously I couldn't fly on an airline that didn't mandate masks, because we weren't even better from our first COVID infection, let alone risking being reinfected. And so we had to cancel our airline tickets and find a way to fly out of Mexico, which was still mandating masks on airlines. So yeah, and they won't let you take a rental car over state lines unless you return it to the same location where you got it from.
Right.
And so we had to rent a U-Haul, which was very expensive, and drive it one way, uh, all with very little money, running out of time, to get out as quickly as we possibly could, and all while being thoroughly disabled by COVID. So, I loaded up my animals. We drove in the U-Haul to, El Paso, Texas. And then we found a friend of a friend of a friend who was able to pick us up on the El Paso side and drive us over to Ciudad Juarez. And we flew out of Ciudad Juarez to Mexico City, where we completed our visa stuff. But everything went wrong the entire time we were working on this time limit and working through these serious disabilities, which, luckily we're both feeling a lot better now, but I can't say that they don't still affect us. We know that like there's been changes to our daily lives as a result of long COVID, and it's hard to even remember what it felt like to be fully healthy. So to compare and contrast how we used to feel versus now, but I can definitely say there's a difference. But luckily, we're able to function day to day again, and we didn't know if that was ever going to happen, because we know a lot of people that didn't get better at all. So it was quite traumatic, and our families still don't really understand why we left the United States. They don't understand the level of disability that we were facing. So like we both get a lot of questions about, oh, why don't you just come back to the US? And it's like we almost died, that would be why.
I think you're definitely a lot better off where you're at.
Yeah, people mask here still. All of the doctors that we've been to mask. They've got offices that are literally set up around avoiding COVID, where they're at least open to the outside, or there's only one patient allowed in the room at a time. So we're finally able to seek medical care without fear, and that's been life changing. And again, I credit that with why we were able to even get better at all, because when we first started noticing an improvement in any way was when we were able to cross the border into Nogales to seek healthcare. And actually, we had to return 3 times, because the first time that we tried to seek healthcare in Mexico, I couldn't walk to the office. I had to stop and turn around because I couldn't even make it. And it was only like like a quarter of a mile from the border to this doctor's office, but I couldn't walk. So we had to drive all the way back to Tucson and then back again just to get these basic antivirals. And I don't know why US doctors weren't prescribing antivirals or anything of the things that Mexican doctors were, but I can safely say there's a much lower rate of long COVID here than there is in the United States. And I can't help but think that that's connected in some way, you know?
Wow. I mean, it's just, yeah, that is something. So you got to Mexico. So how easy was it for you? I mean, like putting aside all the stuff you just said about the trip itself, like and just getting into the kind of paperwork side of it. How easy was it to just get the visa?
Um, I mean, it was hard, but not as hard as other ways I've had to get visas before. Like,
Okay.
um, basically this time we had enough that we could find a Mexican immigration lawyer, and they take care of a lot of the sort of paperwork for you. And so I would definitely recommend that route to anybody that's trying to come, to Mexico or to another country. If you can afford it, an immigration lawyer will save you a lot of time and work. But that also doesn't mean it was easy
Hmm.
because we were working with very limited amounts of money, and it did cost us about $1,000 each for each visa, which to us was quite a lot of money. And then when we actually had the immigration meeting, we had to do so in Mexico City. So we flew from Ciudad Juarez to Mexico City and stayed there for 5 days. And again, everything went wrong. Our hotel denied us in El Paso. So and they were like, yeah, you have to check in before like 3 a.m. or something. And we're like, well, we would have really appreciated knowing that because we haven't slept in a day. And
Hmm.
now we have no place we can even lay down for a couple hours before our flight leaves. And then our flight kept getting delayed, and it kept getting later and later. And we had to be at this immigration meeting in the next morning. So we were like wondering if we were going to miss our immigration meeting, which would have been a serious problem. Um, but luckily, we got there in the nick of time. We had to be there at 5 in the morning and stand in line for about 8 hours just outside until we could go into the government building and get this whole thing done. So I think we ended up not sleeping for 3 days
Wow.
throughout this whole process. And we were like having to explain to the Mexican government officials like why we look so tired.
Aw.
But everybody was so friendly and like helpful. Once we got to Mexico City, we really felt safer because we were like, wow, we're really out now. We can't get stuck in the US anymore. And that was really where we started to feel like we had some energy to get this done. And after that, it's been pretty good. They have you renew once a year. And there was some sort of law that was just passed where now it's changed from 1 year to 3 years.
Oh, nice.
So we should only have to renew one more time. And I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's pretty easy. Because when I lived in China, I had to do border crossings every 3 months to keep my visa. And that's a
Mm.
lot of work. So I'm glad I haven't had to do any border crossings for this. And it's been pretty straightforward. So.
And then after, I mean, I know some places they have like eventually you just become a permanent resident and then you might be able to apply for citizenship or something like that. Is that the case in Mexico or?
Yeah, I'm a temporary resident, and then after
Mhm.
4 years, you can become a permanent resident, and then after I think about a year and a half, you can apply for citizenship. So that's something that we're seriously looking at because the U.S. it's one of only two countries on earth that taxes U.S. citizens that do not live in the United States.
Right.
So you're supposed to like extensively report all of your income and stuff, which I have no idea how I would hire somebody to do that. So, definitely looking at no longer being a US citizen if it ever becomes a possibility for me because it's quite expensive. They double tax you. So at like 30.
Yeah, they double tax you, but then it also costs money to renounce. Like
Yeah.
you
Oh,
have to pay. I mean, I think it's like a couple $1,000s too. Like you have to
oh,
pay.
it's like $10,000 to renounce
Is
your
it
citizenship.
that much?
Yeah, they keep
Oh, I
raising
thought it.
it.
Oh, oh, gee, yeah, because people are leaving.
Yeah, there are so many
Wow.
American refugees here working in factories and working in call centers. You would not believe it. There's a lot of people that have fled and directly identify as refugees, just like we do. So,
It's incredible. I mean, and it's like, they say land of the free, and I'm always like, yeah, try to leave. If it's so free, try to leave. Tell me how free it is.
yep,
Because,
yep.
I mean, I was, and I still am, during the lockdown portion of the pandemic. I was kind of looking around at society, and I thought, okay, we're either going to take a turn in a way better direction, like we're either going to learn from this and take a turn in a better direction, or this is going to be the beginning of the worst. I think it's the latter. I think it's safe to say at this point it is the latter. And I started looking around, and I'm like, I don't know how much longer I can justify living here. For me personally, I mean, I had an opportunity to leave when I was in my 20s. I didn't. And the only reason I didn't was because I really wanted to do stand up. And, being in an industry that is very United States centric has kept me here. If I was in a different line, like if I was in a different field, I probably would have been gone in my 20s, and I guarantee I would have never came back. But like being in a line of work that is very United States centric has kept me here. And now it's like, okay, it's more global now than it ever has been. I don't necessarily need to live here. And I'm looking around and I'm thinking, yeah, I feel like I would have I just don't know. And I'm not going to get on a soapbox right now, especially since I know I'd be preaching to the choir anyway, but like I don't know how much longer I would want to live here, unless something drastically changes, which I don't see happening. And so, I was looking into different exit plans and stuff like that, and I still am. And yeah, so I was really inspired by you. You just got out. You're just like, we're out.
Yeah,
And I know it wasn't easy. I'm not implying that at all. It wasn't easy, but you just made a plan and acted on it immediately.
I mean, yeah, I didn't really have much of a choice. It was that or homelessness. And yeah, I had always wanted to leave again anyways, because once you live in another country for an extended period of time, like even with just basic public transit or healthcare or the
Yeah.
ability to walk somewhere, it's really hard to adjust back to the United States where you need a car for everything. I mean, during that time that I was in Arizona and unable to drive, I was completely dependent on my partner to go anywhere, anywhere. Like I couldn't go to the store, the park, nothing without my partner. Whereas here, I can walk to everything I need in under a half mile. Like, and everybody else can too. There's salons, multiple restaurants, hardware store, computer store, dentist, like literally anything you need is very close, unless you like want to go to a special concert in the center of the city or something. So I just always found that really hard to adjust to in the United States. And in China, I didn't have a car the entire time I was there, and I loved that. I really don't feel safe in a car. I've seen a lot of really nasty accidents, like anybody who's driven in the United States has. And I was keenly aware that a car is basically a tin can. And if you get hit, like chances are you're going to have chronic back pain for the rest of your life at the very least, if not something much worse. And so I didn't like that. I would really rather be on a bus or a train or a subway, or at the very least a taxi where you have an experienced professional driver who knows these streets super well. Like it makes no sense to be driving around yourself if you can avoid it. So I found it super limiting to have to drive everywhere and find parking everywhere, and that whole like sit in traffic for extended periods of time, when I know very well that there's an alternative.
Right.
uh, and so I've been really enjoying that about Mexico. I love being able to walk everywhere.
No, I feel you. I mean, whenever I go anywhere, and I've said this, whenever I leave the country, and the longest I've ever, I studied abroad one summer semester in Italy, so I basically spent 6 weeks in Italy, and yeah, I had a hard, like I came back and I'm like, why do we live the way we live here? Like, why do we do this? And I feel that I have never been anywhere You know, and granted, I've never went to, you know, I have not been to a third world country or anything like that, but like, I've never gone anywhere where I've been there and I've been, and I thought, oh, I wish this place was more like the United States. It's always, why isn't the United States more like this place? Every single time, everywhere I've ever been,